thank you. It's an enormous pleasure for me to be here today, and when I rehearsed and went over the talk at first, I was wondering whether I should say something along the lines that I'm not sure whether I'm throwing Mark under the bus or he's throwing me under the bus here. So we'll see how this turns out. I'm Jens, I'm a web developer, and I want to start very simple here. And the simplicity here should probably start with that I only want to say that I've been in web development for about 20 years now. I worked for small companies, for medium-sized companies, for larger companies, and I had the pleasure to work freelance and as a consultant and to work on my own projects and on other people's projects and all of that, and researching a bit and publishing and blah, blah, blah. So the only thing I want to say with that is I feel grateful that I got to get to know our field from a variety of angles. And I'm very happy about that. And I'm happy about that particularly because I think our field, and I like to be liberal with terms sometimes. Some people might call that quite imprecise, but I like to call it liberal, that I also lump together web development and web design at times. So here I want to keep up a development focus, but don't mind me sometimes bleeding into web design as well. And I think overall, and that is one thing I want to emphasize here now in the next few minutes, is how great of a field we are in and how great the neighboring fields are. And I'm also a thing that I was wondering about when preparing this was whether I should really keep this metaphor that I had in my mind. And it's one that I stole from someone who is talking to writers. And I like to read a lot, and I like to pick up books on any kind of subject. And as I publish and as I write a lot, I picked up a book about writing. And this book was by Rachel Aaron, I believe. And it was one of those heavily promoted books on Amazon. And I read it, and I took a few things out of there. Overall, it contained some nice advice. And then one metaphor stuck in my head, because I feel like not only am I a terrible person to tell jokes, I don't always feel like I can tell good stories. And so she used that metaphor of, if you want to tell a story, you take your characters, you put them in a tree, and that is supposed to symbolize, at least you can pick one tree there, and you put it all on fire, and then you try to save your characters. And I later thought, like, is this a good way of structuring a presentation? And I didn't think about it any further. That happens. And so I will start with that. We will put some things into a tree. And there are 5 things, or families of things I want to emphasize in this first part. Things I find exciting about our field, about web development and design. And also when starting to prepare, I thought, like, well, the first thing to notice is like how it's really easy to get into our field. The first thing to come to my mind was that there's low equipment cost, for instance. Anything with a screen would do. Any computer with a screen would do. Now that seems a bit very simple. So I thought the next good thing would probably be that it's really easy for us to get into our field. And I've made the mistake in earlier years that whenever people approach me about how do I learn web development, how do I learn web design, I scared them by telling them, read the specs. Go and read the specifications. And then people normally left and went elsewhere. And it's still something that I try to not give this advice anymore. But what I like about this is if you think about other industries and other fields, then you notice that oftentimes it's much more obscure and much more expensive to actually get to excellent sources in order to learn a craft. And I think we are in a kind of well, at first I thought like privileged, but that would push it probably. But we are in a great situation that we do actually sit on heaps of materials of excellent quality for free. So specifications and RFCs, dry as they may be, they're still excellent in order to start getting into our field. And then for practicing, that of course is also very important for us in order to actually learn our craft. And for practicing, there are also hosts of interesting options, I think. And the first one probably being that it's very easy to just work with local tests and local files. So we can fire up a text editor key in doc-type HTML, title foo, p-bar, and as you can tell, like I'm alluding to a very simple form, but valid form of HTML that you can then save and open in your browser, and then you see like bar, like as we just keyed in the content for a paragraph. Very simple. To this day, by the way, whenever I want to test something, CSS or something like that, I just work with static files, local test files, very simple and quick to do. And then another thing then that is, I think, a nice peculiarity or characteristic for our field are, of course, that we can use and work with our own websites. And if I can get a quick show of hand, who here has their own website? That is a good number. And I feel like you will all know from your own experience then how this doesn't just start with the practice that you get by running your own website, but it starts, I think, with a deeper commitment. So you own your own site, you feel responsible for it, you feel committed to it, and then starts all that practice that you get. And be it that you start, and that, by the way, these days is my recommendation really for people who want to get into our field, to actually start with our own website because of the commitment, because of the practice we get, even when it's just a business card type page. Even that can be useful. The commitment, the options that we have to try things, to design, to code, to work with something that we own and that we identify with to some degree, hopefully not too much. And then, of course, like we have other people's websites. And I think, ironically, at first I thought like I make a snarky remark about that, how we run other people's websites. And sometimes bad things happen there, but that would be a bit too much, because normally very good things happen with that, because yes, we do practice, and yes, we also sometimes we need that as a playground too in order to grow and learn as professionals. This is useful, but it hones our skills, and we're mostly in the line of working with other people's sites. And so there are like all these practice opportunities, which I believe are actually unique about our field. The really special thing then about web development and design then, I think, is the great power it really comes with. And also at first I thought about, should I go and talk a bit about full stack stuff? And I do struggle a bit with that term, and I do struggle a bit with that term when I pick up books. Again, I said like I like to pick up random things, and there was this book lately, a great list of resources about front-end development, and the author tried to define full stack development and said like, well, it's really hard to define. Well, that is of course not a real definition then for something, but it felt like to me like, yes, that is a bit unclear. And the worst thing for me was always the implications a term like this may have for quality, if quality is a priority for our work. Because if you have a blurry term and you throw in a host of technologies, then does that all imply that person is an expert in all these technologies? Would be an interesting thing, but it's not that important here really. Because I think we have a much better term, a much more interesting term, and a much more powerful term that we can inherit, ironically, from the agency world, where it's about full service. And I find full service really, really, really interesting. Because, so full service, first and foremost, means in the agency realm, if someone needs a website or an app, you develop a concept, you design, you code, you deploy and you launch, you monitor, you optimize, and if you're lucky, I like to be a bit cynical about things, when you are lucky, then it also gets maintained. Of course, in the agency world, this is tricky because normally you need maintenance contracts and blah, blah, blah. But maintenance in the agency world, to me, seems always a bit tricky and difficult, but more from a client angle, actually, than from an agency angle, because from the client side, you need to think about maintenance going down the road, in many cases. But back to full service. As professionals, as people working in our fields, many of us, I would venture to say, work either for agencies at some point in their career, or they work with agencies at some point in their career, or they run their own websites, as we've just seen, like many of us here. And in these capacities, we do touch on this. I believe we are all familiar with this to some degree. We all write some concept or have some idea about something conceptual at times. We do design. We develop. When we have this development focus, of course, we do code. And we bring stuff online and we monitor and we optimize and we market and everything. So I think all of us have a full service kind of profile. And yes, to varying degrees. Some of us are, well, let's assume like developers will normally have their strength there. Some of us have also like design background, or are even stronger there. And others will find it easier to say optimize something, whether that's for search engines or for conversion or whatnot. And then others, like, have again different profiles. For me personally, I guess I tend to always overestimate my design capabilities, but I'm definitely very sure that I have no marketing talent. So there I know where I stand in the full service run, a little bit at least. The thing again is the power now. So when we have an idea about something, about an app or a site, we are in the situation that for us, we can quite possibly actually execute it, quality considerations left aside now, or at least we know for the things that we can't do, who we can contact, who we can work with, what we can do. And we all probably know people like who approach us and say, hey, I have this idea about this app or site. And then they talk about the idea and we feel like, oh, it sounds kind of interesting, maybe want to contribute in some way, and then we don't have the time, or they wouldn't, I don't know, it's just not financially interesting or anything like that. And then months later we meet them again and nothing has happened. Because they are literally, I think, we meet people like that, they have great ideas, but they don't have any idea where to start. They don't know what to do. They don't even know how to ask. Well, apparently they ask us, and we should know, and we could probably do something if we have the time and the interest and stuff. But the point here is that we are actually in a situation to execute on that. And I think this is one of the greatest things about being in our field, like what a unique situation and position we're in. And then there's complexity. And at first that might sound odd, right? I mean, it doesn't exactly sound like something to be excited about. But I believe it is, because actually thinking about, I used to work as a factory line worker at some point as a summer job. And after day 1 or 2, I didn't need this belt anymore that other people were using for the screws and stuff. Not to say that I was so quick or something like that, but the work was so damn boring that I was adding excitement by, I don't know, like changing the ways I walked around the line and stuff like that in order to work on this. And there were people like working on this for 20 years. And then most of the students working there were already fed up with this after 2 hours. So it was really interesting to see that. Now we are certainly not in a field like that, but there is literally so much complexity that I think it challenges us in very interesting and very constructive and very useful ways. And I actually believe we should accept these challenges. Sometimes we meet people who are a bit fed up. They're like, oh my gosh, web development in the last 20 years changed so much, like all these things. And then they don't feel motivated anymore, and they regret like that things have changed the way they changed. But I think we should accept that, and we can even feel excited about it. And also, as a little story, in the early 2000s, I was working for a Java software company. I was the only in-house web developer. I was working on the corporate side, and I worked on client sides. And these were the days, the really dark days, where even Netscape 4 had to be considered, and there was IE5 and IE6, and nothing really worked, and compatibility issues and support issues. And still at days where we had tightened the grip on HTML because we all wanted to write this strict XHTML, and we wanted to use those 100 properties that we had in CSS. And now we're approaching 400 or something like that, which really like is not just linear growth, like things got really complex with CSS. And I'm really torn now whether I should get started on that or not. But complexity. So I was bored. I was like, okay, I approached one of the founders. I'm like, Lars, I want to become a software developer. And that is actually one thing I wouldn't say now. And I wanted to be a software developer, and he's like, sure, we pair you up with our programmers, and here's some things you can work on. Here's a book, and I started reading Bruce Eckel, I think, Thinking on Java. I'm not even sure how many thinking on books he has written. And I started doing that, and I was just lucky that I started reading other books. I started reading Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think, and Nielsen's Homepage Usability, and then Stanford University's B.J. Fogg's book on persuasive technology, which is a really interesting book still about human-computer interaction. I read Robert Bringer's Elements of Typographic Style, and also a lot of books by Edward Tufte on information design. And I can highly recommend Tufte, really, because not just for our field as professionals, but in general, because we deal with information design in a lot of other places, of course, in the media and in newspapers. And there is an astonishing degree of problems, like with graphs and charts, and they sometimes distort the information that we really get. And I think Tufte gives a nice, very pleasant access to this matter. So it's quite enjoyable to deal and to actually learn about this subject. And all the books that are listed, I think, like most of us would have read one of those books, if not more or all of them. So they're really excellent books, and I was just lucky that I ran into all this excellent literature. And yes, it's not development stuff, but I realized, wow, this isn't boring. There is actually so much more to our field, and it all relates to my and our work. So for me, of course, back then it was this personal decision, like, did I want to stay in web development, or do I want to get out of there? And I stayed. And it was that moment where I realized, no, this is not boring. There's a lot of complexity, and this is really challenging. This is really interesting. This is really cool. And I believe, well, the excitement carries me through each day. Yeah? So, complexity. And then now, as we progress from how we get into our field to discovering and acquiring powers, to getting to appreciate the complexity of our field, then we see that we can also give back. And I see two prime ways of giving back to the community and to the field. And that is on the one hand, that is contributing to open source projects. And then two, doing translation work. And if I can get some hands again, like who here contributes or has contributed to open source projects? And who here contributes with translations? This is cool. Like, I suspected that on the translation end we might be fewer people. I think this is actually this is a very interesting piece, because we are getting to learn more about accessibility, I think, today. Like, we are actually making content accessible. So we're helping that more people can get access to, let's hope, excellent information. So whenever you read an excellent article, or whenever we read a super boring spec, we can go out and translate it and make it available in our mother tongue, or whatever we are capable of speaking. And that is great. And then, of course, we can, so apart from making that accessible, and helping the field this way and helping the projects this way, of course, like when we run our website, we host the contents there, we sometimes get a nice kickback too, just as this extra incentive if we then choose, or if that's important for us. On the other hand, for open source contributions, the only thing that I want to point out probably is that there's no change or no contribution that is too small. I believe it's very important, or it's not necessary that we become full-time contributors to a project, but that small edits, like whether that's fixing typos, improving code snippets and so on, go a long way actually in contributing and helping other people in other projects. And for me personally, that means whenever I fork a repository and I go over something, and I have routine checks and routine scripts go over my code base and sometimes say they would compress images or something like that, I would play that back into the repository. And I think these small things are absolutely legitimate, and they help. So it's not needed that we say become like, that we invest a few hours every week in order to become like really like strong contributors and supporters of an open source project. These can be simple things and small things that we can contribute. And I think this is pretty awesome about our field, that we can actually do this, so that we have this option to give back. And then as a fifth point that I want, or family of points if you want, that I like to call out, is also that option. We share this with other fields, of course, but it's still a bit different for us. The option that we publish our ideas or commentary or research, that we can do this, again, another benefit, when we run our own site, we can do this there. And then we can do this for magazines, and we can do this for publishers. And we have a great opportunity there, or great possibilities there, in order to, again, like learn and grow through teaching, in a way, and then also to build a reputation this way. And I find that's unique, and if not for the medium, because this is our medium, and there are probably more options and easier and simpler options for us to go out there and publish than it is for other fields. We have several advantages there. With these things, I want to close this first part and move on to setting everything up on fire. And the way I want to do this is actually not analogous. Like, I will not take the points that I made earlier and try to refute them or anything like that. What I rather like to do is like take some perhaps different aspects. One, for instance, practicing. And that is such a big topic, actually, because practice is really important for us. I hope we can agree on this. It's important that we touch code. As developers, we need to be able to code. And as designers, we should also be able to design something. Now, and it's clear to us that when someone registers a domain at DreamHost, does a one-click install of WordPress, goes to Squarespace and generates a logo, goes to Peloton and generates some colors, and then goes back and downloads a theme and changes some colors and updates the logo, that's not a developer nor a designer. Anyone can do that, and of course what I'm referring to is an entire line of business that allows people to set up sites like that. But we have similar situations in other ways, in other aspects of our work. Because if you want to really push it on the other extreme, if as developers, we just go and write our CSS, write some selectors, some declarations, we test, and then, well, off we go. Preprocessor, linter, who cares? And I exaggerate, of course. But if you think about it, then what is that difference really? So we leave everything that is related to the craft really to tools. Because anyone here, no, not anyone here, anyone outside, we could ask like, hey, this is the basic syntax of a style sheet. How about you go and write something? And the question sometimes is like, is there a noticeable difference then? They might struggle a bit like finding like the declarations that they need in order to do something, and of course it will take some work. But what is the difference really if at the end of the day, at the end of our work, we leave everything else up to the tools? Like cleaning it up, sorting it, like optimizing it in whatever fashion. And I do not want to say that our way of writing CSS this way is so wrong. And I will not make suggestions here. But it goes beyond that. We have other tools that do similar things for us. And the trickiest thing is, we want that too, not just because of convenience, but we actually go out there, and this is a page of the Google book, where at least where I picked it up, is like whenever you see things being done repeatedly, and you can automate them, then go and automate. Like for efficiency and productivity, that is really important. And there's a conflict there. So if we go and try to automate everything and try to use tools for everything and use scripts anywhere, then that has an impact on our craft. And we need to be aware of this. That's probably all I want to say here. This is one danger that we need to watch out for. And I've at some point pushed out this idea, certainly not new, certainly not just coming from me, this idea that we need to make our lives difficult at times. And this is not something that any one of us can tell the other person, because we need to be honest enough that we notice and see where we struggle, where we can't do well enough, in order to then decide we don't use tools for these things, but we understand the technology and we understand how to really do it on ourselves. And for me, as an example, I like to focus, one of the areas that I like to focus on a lot is maintenance and maintainability. And I intentionally, and I'm not a masochist, well, not sometimes maybe, but for some projects I don't use a content management system, nor a static site generator, or anything like that. I maintain it manually. And I have one site, I think, very small, fortunately, thankfully, 38 languages. And I maintain it all by hand. And this is painful. But it is painful in a good way, because when I notice that I fuck up, then, okay, I learned something. There's not a script running in the background that compiles it, or I have just one piece where I change it. No, I intentionally made it a bit harder for myself so that I know when I screw something up, that I feel the pain. So that it's not a tool remedying, or like that I never noticed that I screw up in the first place, or worse, in a team environment, that somebody else cleans up the stuff that I've done. And this is an example for that. So where we intentionally make our lives more difficult, where we focus on practice, where we focus on actually really understanding and mastering our craft. Also a thing that I've not even alluded to, but you can see that clearly, I think, in the power camp. Our industry and our field allow us to work alone. You can work freelance and self-employed, and you can, even as a consultant, I think you can spend a lot of time alone. And then worse, and I really I don't want to make this a topic here, but I think there are some problems around that. Worse, we romanticize and we glorify this idea of the digital and the global nomad. You can just work anywhere, just go to the Caribbean and handle your client projects. And we say, this is great, this is an ideal, this is the ideal worker these days. And I'm exaggerating again just for the emphasis. But there are problems to that. And I'm not talking about what this really does with you, whether it's really that favorable and desirable to leave all your friends and family. But the thing is, when we work alone on stuff, and when we work alone on stuff for an extended period of time, there is a chance that we forego any kind of criticism, and criticism in the sense of scrutiny, not in the sense of negative feedback, by all means, just scrutiny. And we know that pair programming, peer reviews, code reviews are useful for that reason, just so that we have an eye on each other, that we can check, is there something that we can do better, or is there something obviously wrong, or something like that. Up to the point where we outright escape reality. And that probably sounds, oh God, I don't really have a good example for that. But I guess you can really push it very far. And so it's something that we need to watch out for. That when we work alone, this is an option that we have. It comes as a perk of our field. And we will see at a later point then too, how it is actually also very tempting to do that, but how it's something we need to watch out for. That we need to guard ourselves against. And then the power in general and the sky having no limits. And actually there I should probably say, we obviously have touched on the point of choice, where you can work alone and freelance, where you can hire with agencies or multinationals, or you can try a lot of things in our field, up to founding companies. And we see great examples for companies in web design and development. If I think about Jimdo in Germany, for instance, or Wix in the US, for instance, companies that of course target people who want to run websites, and we are in that business and so on. I find these are interesting examples for companies that are successful. I think they actually had their ups and downs, but as examples for where we can push a very development and design-centric idea of our profession. And so what happens there is, and I don't necessarily see that and observe that much when it comes to career choices, that people are literally waiting for months to decide whether they want to work freelance or whether they want to work for a company. But we see this, I think, in technology and tool choices, and then also when we work on our own projects, that we lose focus. That with this power that we can do anything leads to that we actually do anything. And that is problematic. And with that comes some sense of inertia too, that sometimes we get a bit slower because first we need to evaluate this and that, and maybe how do we choose and things like that. So there are effects of this. And then in the next aspect, the complexity of our field, now we get to some of the drawbacks, that it's gotten really obscure now what's right or wrong. And in the technical realm, as we know, there often is right or wrong. Sometimes there isn't. There are a good number of questions, and I think we are then venturing more in design and usability and preferences and so on. You don't have a right or wrong. But for some technical questions, you can clearly say something performs or works better than the other. But it's gotten really, really difficult now to tell when that is the case. And I would venture to say that this affects us as experts, as professionals, just as much as anyone else, or whether we are junior or more expert or more senior. And I think there are two reasons for that. One thing is something I think we all struggle with in a way, and that is probably the simpler reason, that it's really hard to tell who is an expert. How do we judge that? Is that that person has published something, or worked for a company, or has written this project? Or what is it? How do we tell whether a person really has a point somewhere? And maybe we find out we can't really tell that because we can all make mistakes. And of course, on the other side of the spectrum, there are good points that junior developers and junior members of our field do make. So we sometimes get feedback from people who aren't really long in our field, and they can make excellent remarks and point us to things that we have completely overlooked. So the expertise thing is one thing. The other thing then, and I will try to not make this too academic because I don't think that would help us that much, but there is a problem in the way we argue. And I will give an example also out of a field or an area dear to me, and that's frameworks development. And you can perfectly imagine a person A saying, hell yes, absolutely use a framework, always, because you can quickly get something out off the ground, you can quickly work your project and quickly see whether this is working or not, proof of concept. And then you get a person like me who says like, oh my gosh, please do not use a framework. Because sooner or later you want to tailor a framework. An external framework can never know what you intend to do with your site. So it comes with too much code. If it more often than enough, it comes with too much code than too little, because obviously you pick the stuff that covers your needs. But it will always cover more than those. So it has bloat in there, thus it's not efficient, thus it therefore brings performance issues, and there are also security problems with that. If you're always continuously hooking up to third-party services or servers or something like that, or always need to watch for a third party. Now you have these two persons, and they tell you something contradictory. One says, don't use them. The other says, do use them. And of course, like, we already see what's the problem here, because the premises and the goals are different. The person like favoring and advocating frameworks, and let it be something else too, like could be libraries or something like that. So he's saying like here, speed of execution is important and proof of concept. And the other person says like, no, quality is important and security. So premises are different. The next thing there is like we need to, I guess like this is fairly easy to follow, but it's something that we need to keep in mind both as recipients when we follow arguments, and then also as the ones bringing them forth. When we write, we need to be clear that it's important that we make clear, the premises of our arguments. What are we really after? And then we can still run into situations where we get 5 different expert opinions, and they are all different, and they are all right. And then you have other aspects where, of course, like you have several people, they all give you some answers, and they're all wrong. And it's just gotten difficult to tell. And I think we perhaps just need to acknowledge that it's gotten really hard now, and that we stay careful when it comes to judging solutions and judging commentary and judging our views because of exactly this situation. So it's important that we keep in mind that we argue properly, and I don't think like since this is really something you can dive in academically, where it's about like the logical construction of arguments, that this is probably not a problem that goes away that soon, not in the landscape that we're in right now where we face that ton of complexity. The different technologies, the different tools, the different philosophies, the different approaches, the different mindsets, etc. And then the fifth point I want to make here, where we put everything on fire, is that instant publishing, as nice as it is to get a kick out of publishing something on our website, the kick we get out of publishing an article for a magazine, the kick that we get from publishing our first book, or the second, or whatever, that this is also something to guard against. Because yes, we probably get some reviews then at later stages. It must make some sense what we're saying and what we're doing. And yeah, probably something useful in there. But it is a problem too, because we get this gratification, we get this kick, but it is also a danger that it messes with us in a way that we think like there is something more to our work, that we are somewhat special. And this I want to use to actually quickly jump to the next points where we try to get ourselves out of this situation. And I can already say, I don't have 5 points again, only 3 more, and they're also not exact matches to what I've just described. We've seen, I hope, that our field and our neighboring fields are really special. And I think they really are. But the thing is, we're not. And it's funny because I do not want to make this a hobby psychologist thing. And I don't believe much in this idea that we say, oh, No, we are all special, and then we're not again, or something like that, and then we get into some, I don't know where you end up then, where this is going when you start arguing this way. Of course, we are valuable, and we're people and everything, but our field gives us unique opportunities, very unique advantages. But it's not that this makes like we're special in the sense that we are also entitled. And I think entitlement these days is a really important thing to keep in mind. And I need to caution myself now not to again like get on this track of hobby psychology here. But there are these indications and these ideas that whenever we look around in society, people for quite opposite reasons actually, the people who are doing really, really well seem to feel really entitled about everything, need special treatment. And then we also have people like who do really, really poorly, and they also feel entitled, and they also feel they need special treatment. And we have that, and I want to stop my commentary on that there, because what do I know? But the thing is, it is something that I think affects us too. There are unique options and opportunities in our field, unique powers that come with it. Okay, let's just be grateful for this. The other thing that I think we can look at more closely is focus. And I want to start with a little story there. I picked up a book by Gary Keller last year. It's called The One Thing. And I think it's also pretty popular. And I read this book and I'm like, okay, awesome, focus. And the idea is really like you pick in your work life and in your personal life, etc. Maybe also for your day, you pick your one thing that you want to focus on. The essence of the book is pretty simple. So what does Jens do? I sit down and open up a spreadsheet, and as a self-employed person working on my own stuff, I'm listing all the different things that I'm doing. And I come up with this list of 50 items. I say, Jens, okay, yeah, focus. And I was marking through and Xing out like these things that weren't important, or found like, they're not important, and ended up with a list of 45 items. That is not focus. And it took me actually a major personal earthquake earlier this year where things were pretty shitty. And I was like, I don't really work on stuff right now, but for some reason I need to. I need to do some things. And I was looking at the different things that I was doing and thinking about them, and also feeling a bit more like, where's my heart at? Because I was trying all sorts of shit and stuff and projects here and there. Because when you're self-employed and when you really look into making a living, and we have these options, right? We can focus on content sites, affiliate marketing. There are people making thousands of euros with that. So why not do these test balloons? And I was looking at it, and I ended up with 2 or 3 things. I was like, okay, okay. Well, it didn't set out to get through a major crisis, but at least I'm focused now. And I do not wish this to anyone else here, that it's necessary, and I want to suggest that it's important for us to go through any kind of crisis in order to get there. But I do believe, and I strongly believe, that it is important for us to focus, that we are aware of where are our priorities. And by the way, things get, of course, as always, they get more subtle. For instance, if you are a junior developer or designer or member of our field, it does make sense to try things, to cast a wider net. Try things, don't be too focused. Look at everything. But the ones who are more senior here, I think it is important that we focus, that we know what is really important. What are the projects we need to look at? What are the technologies we want to be really good at? So what is it that really matters? And where is our heart at? I think this is really crucial. And then lastly, this is an odd thing too. And I will try to explain this just a bit, because we've already talked about working alone and stuff like that, and then also what the options that we have on our field do with us. And for me, try to think whether this is such a useful start, but I'll try it this way. In my time at Google, and it's a high-performance environment, I never really struggled there. It's not to say that I can do all these things that easily, no. The reason why I didn't struggle, and I only noticed this years later, was that I had already carved out a niche. I have my specializations, and I suspect many of you do too. You specialize in something. And the interesting thing about specialization is, it's actually a very smart way of escaping competition. Because when you're a specialist in something, and when you work in an environment where evidently when you're the only person doing this stuff, so it doesn't mean that on the whole planet you're the only person doing this. No, but it suffices. If in your company or in your team you're the only person doing something, you're a specialist, and it's harder to compete against you. And what I'm trying to say is, and I need to start another thread here, there's an excellent book by Alfie Kohn called No Contest. And not only does he argue that we as humans aren't inherently competitive, but rather the opposite. We are cooperative. We get where we are, and we got where we are through working together, through cooperating. And I deem it actually a really terrible thing when we keep on telling ourselves these stories that we are all competitive and that we would eat ourselves alive and all that stuff. I think this is BS. We are cooperative. So now when you look at it, if we assume that we are cooperative, and then another point Kohn makes, we are in an environment full of structural competition, as he calls it, where in education, in the workplace, in society, you have all these circumstances that force you to compete with your fellow beings, humans, the English leaves me here, Menschen. That's bad news. So, I mean, we all need to be better, and we all get compared and judged and assessed and so on. I think this is terrible. And for me, it was so funny, because I noticed, I'm taking on competition. I don't mind competing. I don't want to, but if someone is pushing me, I compete. But then I think the strategy is nice if you think about, you specialize, or you work alone on things and so on, because you're competing in a way, but you're also not. And then, as we've seen, some other issues come up. Because you isolate yourself on a professional level and so on, you have different issues then. So the point that I try to make here is just let's not fix the world here. I have no idea what we are supposed to do about structural competition in the workplace. No idea. That's not my cup of tea, really. But it is important for us, I think, to be aware of this and to look at it and figure out, okay, well, maybe it affects us, at least acknowledge that. Closing then, I want to do with the opening remarks and with what I've sprinkled in here and there, that our field, web development, design, and also the neighboring professions are awesome. They're fantabulous. It's really fun. There are lots of great things about our fields. What we learn there, the opportunities that we have, the growth paths that we see there, the many options, I think, are fantabulous. So that's all I want to really say now, and that's why I'm personally also very excited now to see all the other talks and to be here at Beyond Tellerrand now for today and tomorrow. Thank you.